Baruch Spinoza was condemned to death in life by an entire community, not for having killed someone, not for having stolen, not for having committed treason, but for having thought, for having asked questions that no one should ask, for having reached conclusions that no one should reach. When he entered that synagogue for the last time, he already knew what was going to happen. The rabbis had already decided. The sentence was already written. He would be excommunicated with the herem, the most brutal curse that Judaism could cast upon someone. No one could speak to him, look at him, touch him. His books were to be burned. His name was to be forgotten. He was dead to Israel. And all of this because he had the audacity to question what he was taught about God. Spinoza was not a violent rebel. He was not a street revolutionary. He was a brilliant scholar, the son of respected merchants, someone who deeply understood the sacred scriptures. But the more he studied, the more he realized something disturbing. The answers he was given made no sense. The miracles described in the Bible challenged the natural laws he observed in the world. The stories about God contradicted each other. The prophets seemed like ordinary men with political visions, not divine spokespersons. And then came the question that changed everything. What if God is not what they told us? What if God is not a king in heaven, not a furious judge, not a person who rewards the good and punishes the bad? What if God is something completely different? Spinoza found his answer. And that answer was so radical, so dangerous to the structures of religious power, that it needed to be silenced. Because if Spinoza was right, then the entire religious hierarchy would crumble. There would be no need for intermediaries between man and God. There would be no need for rituals, for sacrifices, for blind obedience, because God would not be separate from creation. God would be creation itself. God would be everything. And if God is everything, then every human being, every animal, every plant, every stone is a manifestation of God. This idea destroyed his life, but it created one of the most important philosophies in human history. After the excommunication, Spinoza changed his name to Bento. He left his community, he left his family. He began to live alone, making a living polishing lenses while writing at night. No church, no synagogue, nothing but his mind and his courage. And what he produced in those years of solitude was revolutionary, a philosophy that said, you do not need a priest to talk to God. You do not need rituals. You do not need fear, because you are already part of God. You always have been. You always will be. Today you will get to know this complete journey. Not a simplified version, not a philosophical legend, but the real story of a man who preferred to lose everything rather than live a lie. A man who looked at God and saw something that no one was prepared to see. A man who paid the highest price for the truth and yet did not regret it. Get ready, because what you are about to discover may forever change the way you see God, religion, and yourself. Baruch Spinoza was born into a family that knew very well the meaning of persecution. His paternal grandparents were Sephardic Jews who fled Portugal to escape the Inquisition. Portugal, like Spain, had become an impossible territory for Jews who did not want to convert to Catholicism or die in the fires of the church. Thousands fled. Many died along the way. Some managed to reach the Netherlands, where they found something rare at that time, relative religious tolerance. The Spinoza family settled in the Portuguese Jewish community of Amsterdam, one of the most prosperous in Europe. Baruch's father, Michael, became a successful merchant, importing dried fruits and other products from the Mediterranean. He was a respected man in the synagogue, someone who contributed financially to the community, who participated in important decisions, who educated his children in the teachings of the Torah. Baruch was the second son. He was born in 1632, at a time when the Dutch Republic was at the height of its commercial and cultural power. It was the era of Rembrandt, of Vermeer, of an unprecedented artistic and intellectual explosion. But for the Jewish community, which still bore the scars of persecution, the priority was to maintain faith, preserve traditions, ensure that the children grew up as devout Jews. And Baruch was an exceptional student. From an early age, he demonstrated a sharp intelligence. He learned Hebrew easily. He studied the Torah, the Talmud, the commentaries of the great rabbis. By the age of 15, he was already considered one of the most promising students in the community. Some said he could become a great rabbi. Others imagined he would follow in his father's footsteps in business, but with an additional wisdom that came from his deep religious education. But then something began to change. Baruch started to ask questions. At first they were normal questions, the kind that every bright student asks. Why did God command this and not that? How do we know that Moses really spoke with God? What does it mean to say that God is infinite? The rabbis answered patiently. They quoted the sacred texts. They explained traditional interpretations, but Baruch was not satisfied because the answers led to more questions. And the more he studied, the more he realized something disturbing. The sacred texts contradicted each other. The stories did not fit together. The miracles described challenged everything he observed in nature. He began to study other authors. He read Maimonides, the great medieval Jewish philosopher who tried to reconcile faith with Aristotelian reason. He read Ibn Ezra, who had made subtle but subversive comments about the authorship of the biblical texts. And then, at some point, he began to read Christian philosophers. Descartes, the great René Descartes, who had revolutionized philosophy by doubting everything and reconstructing knowledge from pure reason. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." The only thing we cannot doubt is that we are thinking. Everything else may be illusion, may be deception of the senses, may be a trick of a deceiving demon. But thought itself is real. Baruch devoured these ideas, because Descartes was doing something that religion prohibited. He was doubting. He was using reason as the main tool, not faith. And if Descartes could doubt everything, why couldn't Baruch doubt too? He began to question the immortality of the soul. The Torah, curiously, hardly speaks about life after death. This concept was developed much later, influenced by other cultures, other religions. But if the Torah itself does not make it clear that there is a heaven or hell, why did the rabbis insist so much on it? He began to question the miracles. Did God really stop the sun in the sky for Joshua to win a battle? Did Moses really part the Red Sea? Or were these metaphors, stories written to inspire the people, not literal accounts? And then came the most dangerous question of all. Who wrote the Torah? Tradition said that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, dictated directly by God. But Baruch noticed something strange. The Torah describes the death of Moses. How could Moses have written about his own death? Furthermore, there were changes in style, internal contradictions, repetitions that suggested multiple authors. What if the Torah was not written by Moses? What if it was written by several authors over centuries, each with their own political and religious agenda? This question alone was capable of destroying the entire structure of religious authority. Because if the Torah was not dictated by God, then it is a human text, fallible, questionable. And if it is questionable, then the rabbis have no divine authority. They are merely interpreters of an ancient text written by men. Baruch shared these doubts with a few close friends. It was the year 1655. He was 23 years old, and his ideas were already causing alarm in the community. The rabbis were informed. They summoned Baruch for private talks. They tried to correct him. They tried to show him that he was on the wrong path, that he was being influenced by dangerous Christian ideas, that he was losing his connection to the faith of his ancestors. But Baruch did not back down. He could not, because it was not a matter of rebellion. It was a matter of truth. He had seen something he could not unsee. He had understood something he could not pretend not to understand. And then the rabbis made a decision. If Baruch did not retract, if he did not abandon his heretical ideas, he would be excommunicated. There would be no turning back. There would be no forgiveness. He would be dead in life. The entire community was summoned. It was July 27th, 1656, a hot summer day. The synagogue was packed. Everyone knew what was going to happen. Everyone knew they were about to witness something terrible. Baruch entered. He walked to the center. He looked around. He saw faces he had known since childhood. He saw teachers who had taught him. He saw friends with whom he had studied. He saw merchants with whom his father did business. And fear, because it was not just about Baruch, it was about all of them. If Baruch was right, then everyone was living a lie, and no one wanted to face that possibility. The chief rabbi, Saul Levi Mortera, stood up. He was an old man, with a white beard and a deep voice. He had been one of Baruch's teachers. He had watched the boy grow up, admired his intelligence, dreamed of the brilliant rabbi he could become. And now he held a scroll, the decree of excommunication. His voice echoed through the stone walls of the synagogue. With the judgment of the angels and the sentence of the saints, we excommunicate, expel, curse, and execrate Baruch Spinoza. Let him be cursed by day and cursed by night, cursed when he lies down and cursed when he rises, cursed when he goes out and cursed when he comes in. May the Lord not forgive him. May the wrath and fury of the Lord burn against this man. All the curses written in the book of the law shall fall upon him, and the Lord shall erase his name from under heaven. Absolute silence. Then came the final order. No one shall communicate with him orally or in writing. No one shall do him any favor. No one shall remain under the same roof as him. No one shall approach within 4 cubits of him. No one shall read anything written or transcribed by him. Baruch said nothing. He did not shout. He did not cry. He did not plead for forgiveness. He simply turned his back and left. And when he crossed that door, something extraordinary happened. He did not feel despair. He did not feel regret. He felt freedom. Because for the first time in his life, he no longer had to pretend. He no longer had to bow before authorities that made no sense. He no longer had to accept answers that answered nothing. He was alone now, completely alone, but it was a solitude he had chosen. And in that solitude, he would begin to build something that would change human thought forever. Baruch Spinoza left that synagogue without looking back. His steps were firm, even though his future was completely uncertain. He had just lost everything: his family, his community, his friends, his guaranteed livelihood. His father had died a few years earlier, but his brothers were alive, and now they could no longer speak to him. His sister could no longer hug him. The merchants who worked with his family could no longer do business with him. He was dead to everyone he knew. But Baruch, or Bento as he began to call himself after the excommunication, adopting the Latin form of his name, was not defeated, because within him was something that no religious decree could destroy: his mind. And his mind was more alive than ever. He needed a place to live. He needed a way to make money. And he needed time to think, to write, to develop the ideas that had cost him his social life. Bento found a small room to rent outside the Jewish area. It was a modest space, with a window overlooking a quiet street. There he set up a small workshop. He would learn to polish optical lenses, a profession that was in high demand at the time. The Netherlands was the world center for the production of optical instruments. Telescopes, microscopes, glasses, everything depended on well-polished lenses. And Bento discovered that he had a knack for it. There was something almost meditative about the process of polishing lenses. The constant circular motion, the precision required, the patience to transform a piece of raw glass into something that allowed one to see the world more clearly. It was a perfect metaphor for what he was trying to do with philosophy, to polish human understanding until we could see reality with absolute clarity. During the day, he polished lenses. At night, he wrote, and what he wrote was revolutionary. Bento began to develop an idea that had germinated in his mind for years. What if God and nature were the same thing? Not 2 separate entities, creator and creation, but a single infinite substance that manifests in everything that exists. This idea had a name in Latin: Deus sive natura, God or nature. Either way, they are 2 names for the same reality. Think about that for a moment. If God is not separate from creation, then God is not up there in heaven, watching from afar. God is here. Now, in you, in me, in the tree outside, in the dog passing by on the street, in the stars, in the atoms, in everything. This means that when you look at a mountain, you are looking at God. When you breathe, it is God breathing through you. When you think, it is God thinking. There is no separation. There never was. There never will be. Can you understand how radical this is? It means that there is no sin in the traditional sense, because everything that happens is God happening. It means that there is no free will in the sense we imagine, because every choice we make is determined by prior causes, which are determined by even earlier causes, in an infinite chain that is the very nature of God unfolding. It means that there is no heaven or hell waiting for us after death, because there is nothing separate from God. When we die, we simply return to the infinite substance of which we have always been a part. It means that we do not need priests, rabbis, intermediaries, because there is no distance between us and God. There never was. Now stop and think. Does what you just read change anything in the way you see religion? Is there anything in the dogmas you were taught that still makes sense after considering this possibility? If everything is God, and God is everything, then what does it mean to pray? What does it mean to ask for forgiveness? What does it mean to fear divine judgment? Write in the comments now. If God is not separate from you, if you are literally a part of God, does that change the way you live your life? Does it change your choices? Does it change your fear? Because here is the truth that Spinoza discovered. Most people do not want this freedom. Most prefer to believe in a separate God, a judge who rewards and punishes, because that gives meaning to suffering. It brings order to chaos. It gives hope that, in the end, the good will be rewarded and the bad punished. But what if it is not like that? What if the universe simply is without judgment, without moral purpose, just existing according to its own necessary laws? If you have come this far on this journey, it is because you have the courage to question, and that is rare. Most give up when the questions become too difficult, but you do not. You are here, seeking, wanting to understand. So be part of this circle of seekers. Subscribe to the channel now, because what comes in the next blocks goes even deeper. We will explore not only what Spinoza thought, but how he lived, how he faced solitude, how he responded to attacks, how he built, brick by brick, a philosophical system that still challenges everything we have been taught about God, freedom, and happiness. Bento continued writing in his small room. He knew that what he was producing was dangerous, so dangerous that if he published under his name, he could be imprisoned, tortured, killed. The Inquisition still existed. The Catholic Church still burned heretics. And what he was writing was pure heresy. But he could not stop, because the truth, once seen, cannot be ignored. He began to work on his first major philosophical treatise. It would not be published in his lifetime, he knew that. But he needed to write, he needed to organize his thoughts. He needed to create a coherent system that explained not only God, but everything. The universe, the human mind, emotions, ethics, politics, freedom. In the meantime, his reputation began to spread in a strange way. On one hand, he was a pariah, an excommunicated person, someone to be avoided. On the other hand, some intellectuals began to seek him out. Philosophers, scientists, thinkers who had heard of this brilliant young man with radical ideas about God and nature. One of these men was Simon de Vries, a wealthy merchant who became Bento's disciple. He regularly visited the small room where Bento worked, bringing philosophical questions, debating ideas, marveling at the clarity and depth of thought of that solitary man. De Vries was not alone. Gradually, a small circle formed. It was not a formal school, it was not an institution, just a group of men who gathered to discuss Spinoza's ideas. They called him the philosopher, and their meetings were secret, because what they discussed could land them all in prison. Bento taught these men something fundamental. Freedom does not come from obeying religious laws. Freedom comes from understanding necessity. When you understand why things happen, when you see the chain of causes and effects that governs everything, you stop fighting against reality. You accept. And in that acceptance, you find peace. This does not mean passive resignation. It means wisdom. It means understanding that you cannot control the universe, but you can control your understanding of the universe. And this understanding frees you from fear, anger, vain hope, from all the emotions that enslave us. Emotions, Bento realized, are like waves in the ocean. They arise, grow, break, disappear. It is useless to fight against them. But if you understand where they come from, if you comprehend the causes that produce them, they lose power over you. You still feel anger, you still feel fear, you still feel sadness, but you are not dominated by these emotions. You observe them, you understand them, and then they pass. This was the promise of Spinoza's philosophy. Not happiness in the common sense, not constant pleasure, but something deeper. Beatitude, a serene joy that comes from understanding your own nature as part of God, as part of the infinite whole. But to get there, you need to destroy all illusions. And the greatest of all illusions is that you are a separate individual with free will, capable of choosing your destiny. You are not separate. You are part of an infinite system of causes and effects. Every thought you have was caused by something prior. Every decision you make is the necessary result of your nature, combined with circumstances. There is no you floating freely above the causal chain. You are the causal chain. Does that sound frightening? Does it seem to strip all meaning from life? Spinoza would say the opposite. It is precisely when you accept that you have no free will that you become truly free, because you stop blaming yourself. You stop living with resentment. You stop imagining that things should be different. They are as they are because they could not be otherwise, and when you fully accept this, you find peace. In the years following his excommunication, Bento lived a simple life. He polished lenses, he wrote at night, he received occasional visitors, he maintained correspondence with other philosophers throughout Europe. His fame grew slowly, but always underground, always secret. He never married, he never had children, he never accumulated wealth. He lived in rented rooms, eating simple meals, wearing modest clothes, but his mind was creating something immense. In 1661, he began working on his masterpiece, the Ethics. It would not just be a treatise on morality, it would be a complete system, demonstrated geometrically, as Euclid demonstrated theorems. Starting from definitions and axioms, he would build, step by step, a complete understanding of God, the mind, emotions, human servitude, and human freedom. It would take years. The Ethics would only be published after his death, but when it was published, it would change philosophy forever. Baruch Spinoza's life was strangely peaceful for someone who had been cursed and excommunicated. But there was a reason for this. He had learned something that most people never learn. He had learned to not need external approval. He did not need the synagogue to accept him. He did not need his family to love him. He did not need society to respect him. Because he had found something deeper, the understanding of the necessity of all things. But that does not mean he was indifferent to the world. On the contrary, he observed everything with keen attention. And what he saw in the politics and religion of his time deeply concerned him. The Netherlands, despite being relatively tolerant, was still a divided society. There was constant tension between the Orthodox Calvinists, who wanted to impose a rigid morality, and the more liberal Republicans, who advocated for greater freedom of thought and trade. And in the midst of this tension, there was the ever-present question: how much power should religion have over the state? Bento had a clear answer: none. Not because he hated religion, but because he understood that religion, when mixed with political power, became a tool of oppression. Religious leaders were not interested in truth. They were interested in control. They used the fear of hell, the promise of heaven, the threat of excommunication to keep people obedient, and people obeyed. Not because they genuinely believed, but because they were afraid. Afraid of being excluded, afraid of being punished, afraid of losing their eternal salvation. Bento saw this as a form of slavery, the worst form of slavery, because it was not just the body that was trapped, it was the mind. In 1670 he did something bold. He published a book, not under his own name, but anonymously. The title was Theological Political Treatise, and it was explosive. In this book, Bento did something that no one had done before with such clarity and courage. He applied critical analysis to the Bible, not as a sacred text that should be accepted without question, but as a historical document written by human beings in specific contexts. He showed that Moses could not have written the entire Torah because the text refers to events that happened long after Moses' death. He showed that the prophets were not supernatural seers, but men with vivid imaginations who interpreted the events of their time through visions. He showed that the miracles described in the Bible were either metaphors or misunderstood natural events. And then he went even further. He argued that true religion has nothing to do with rituals, dogmas, or obedience to religious authorities. True religion, he said, is simply justice and charity, loving your neighbor, acting with compassion. That's all. Everything else is superstition invented by men who wanted power. Can you imagine the scandal? The book was immediately condemned. The Calvinist authorities demanded it be banned. Preachers denounced the anonymous author as the most dangerous atheist in Europe. Some suspected it was Spinoza, but they had no proof. Bento observed all of this from his quiet room. He had anticipated the reaction, but he did not back down, because he knew he had spoken the truth. And the truth does not need protection. The truth protects itself. The central argument of the theological political treatise was simple but devastating. The Bible does not teach philosophy or science. The Bible teaches obedience. It was written for an ancient people who needed simple laws and inspiring stories to stay united. But these stories are not literally true, they are pedagogically useful. So when Joshua asks God to stop the sun, and the text says the sun stopped, it does not mean the sun literally stopped moving. It means that from Joshua's perspective, he had enough time to win the battle. It is a way of saying that he was lucky, that circumstances favored his victory, but simple people who do not understand metaphors interpreted literally, and thus the myth of the miracle was born. The prophets, Bento argued, did not have special knowledge about nature or God. They had powerful imaginations. When Isaiah saw God sitting on a throne surrounded by seraphim, he did not literally see that. He had an intense psychological experience that he interpreted through the images available in his culture. If he had lived in another time, in another culture, he would have seen something different. And this does not diminish the importance of the prophets. On the contrary, it shows that they were human beings trying to understand deep moral issues. But they were not infallible. They were not direct spokespersons for God. They were wise men, some more than others, speaking about justice and compassion in the best way they knew how. This analysis completely destroyed the authority of the Bible as a literal text. And if the Bible is not literal, then the theologians who base their power on literal interpretation have no authority at all. Bento was essentially saying, you, religious leaders, are frauds. You use fear and ignorance to control people, but I see through you, and I am showing everyone else how to see too. Can you imagine the courage it took to do this? In a time when the Inquisition still existed, when heretics were burned, when saying the wrong thing could cost you your life. But Bento was not afraid of death, because he had understood something fundamental. Death is not the end of you. It is merely the dissolution of a particular form that the infinite substance had temporarily assumed. When you die, the atoms that made up your body continue to exist. The energy that animated your thoughts continues to exist. Nothing is lost. It just transforms. So, what was there to fear? In the following years, Bento continued working on the ethics. It was an immense project. He wanted not only to destroy the old illusions, but to build something new. A complete system of understanding that would show how human beings could achieve true happiness. And the key to this happiness, he realized, was knowledge. Not superficial knowledge, not information, but deep understanding of the nature of reality. He divided knowledge into 3 types. The first type is opinion. It is what we hear from others, what we absorb from culture, what we believe without questioning. Most people live entirely at this level. They believe what they have been taught. They believe because everyone believes. They never question, the from faith. He believed that understanding the world through reason was the highest form of knowledge, and that divine revelation, as traditionally understood, often led to misunderstanding and conflict. Spinoza argued that the essence of God was not separate from nature, but was the very substance of reality itself. This perspective was radical and challenged the prevailing religious views of his time. As the years passed, Spinoza continued to refine his thoughts and ideas. He engaged in discussions with various thinkers, always seeking to clarify his philosophy. He was particularly interested in the implications of his ideas for ethics and politics. He believed that a true understanding of God and nature would lead to a more just and harmonious society. His vision was one where individuals would act not out of fear or ignorance, but from a place of understanding and love. In 1677, shortly after Spinoza's death, his work was published posthumously. The ethics, along with his other writings, began to attract attention. Some were drawn to his ideas, while others were horrified by what they perceived as heresy. The controversy surrounding his work only fueled interest, and over time Spinoza's philosophy began to gain traction among intellectuals and thinkers across Europe. His ideas about the interconnectedness of all things, the nature of reality, and the importance of reason resonated with many. The Enlightenment thinkers in particular found inspiration in Spinoza's work. They admired his commitment to rational thought and his rejection of dogma. His influence can be seen in the writings of later philosophers, including Leibniz, Hegel, and Nietzsche. Spinoza's philosophy also laid the groundwork for modern secular thought. By emphasizing the importance of reason and understanding over faith and superstition, he helped pave the way for a more rational approach to ethics and politics. His ideas about the nature of God and the universe challenged traditional religious beliefs, and encouraged individuals to seek knowledge and understanding for themselves. Today, Spinoza is regarded as one of the most important philosophers in Western history. His work continues to be studied and debated, and his ideas remain relevant in discussions about ethics, politics, and the nature of existence. The legacy of Spinoza is one of intellectual courage and a profound commitment to understanding the world through reason and experience. His vision of a life guided by knowledge and love continues to inspire those who seek a deeper understanding of themselves and their place in the universe. Ancient texts. That God reveals himself constantly through the laws of nature, not through miracles that violate those laws. That the Bible can teach simple morals to simple people, but does not contain profound philosophical truths. These letters are fascinating because they show Spinoza not as a cold atheist, but as someone deeply religious in his own way. He loved God, but his God was the entire nature, not an old bearded man in the sky. His love for God was love for reality as it is, not as we would like it to be. In 1676, something extraordinary happened. Spinoza received a visit from a young German philosopher named Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Leibniz was at the beginning of his brilliant career. He had read some of Spinoza's works and was fascinated, but also concerned. The two men talked for several days. They discussed metaphysics, mathematics, theology. Leibniz asked many questions. Spinoza answered with his usual clarity. But Leibniz left those conversations disturbed. He realized that Spinoza's ideas were more radical than he had imagined, and he understood that if these ideas spread, they would completely shake the social and religious order of Europe. Then Leibniz did something strange. He spent the rest of his life developing a philosophy that was, in many ways, a response to Spinoza. He tried to show that yes, it was possible to have free will, that yes, it was possible for God to be separate from creation, that yes, there were reasons for optimism about the moral purpose of the universe, but he never publicly admitted how much he owed to Spinoza. On the contrary, in public, he denounced Spinoza as a dangerous atheist. In private, he copied entire parts of Spinoza's arguments. This was the typical reaction to Spinoza. People were fascinated, but they were also afraid to accept the full implications of his ideas. Because if Spinoza was right, then the entire structure of meaning that supported European society was wrong. Spinoza continued his simple life, polishing lenses, writing, receiving occasional visitors. He did not have many possessions. When he died, his entire estate would fit into a small suitcase, but his mind contained riches that the world would take centuries to fully process. He knew he was ill. His lungs were damaged, probably from the glass dust he inhaled while polishing lenses. He coughed frequently. He had difficulty breathing, but he did not complain, because he had understood that even illness and death are necessary. They are part of the natural functioning of the universe. There is nothing to lament. The last years of Spinoza's life were marked by an increasing awareness that his time was running out. His lungs were constantly worsening. The cough was frequent, especially at night. Breathing became more difficult each month, but he kept working. There was still so much to write, so much to think about. In 1677, he was working on a political treatise. He wanted to show how a free society could function, a society where people were not controlled by religious superstition, where reason guided the laws, where each individual had freedom of thought and expression. These ideas were dangerous because they suggested that the power of rulers did not come from God, but from the consent of the people, that laws were not divine commandments carved in stone, but human agreements that could be changed when they ceased to serve the common good. Spinoza argued that the purpose of government was not to control people, but to free them. A good government creates conditions for people to develop their rational capacities. A bad government keeps people in fear and ignorance to facilitate control. And the worst form of control, he argued, was religious control, because it did not just regulate external behavior. It tried to control thoughts, beliefs, inner conscience. It tried to make people feel guilty for their own thoughts. This, Spinoza said, was tyrannical beyond imagination. Because every person has the right to their own thoughts. No one can be forced to believe. You can force someone to pretend to believe. You can threaten them with punishment until they say the right words. But you cannot force them to actually believe. And if you cannot force, then you should not try. Freedom of thought is absolute. It must be protected above all. Because without freedom of thought, there is no reason. Without reason, there is no progress. Without progress, humanity remains trapped in the darkness of superstition. He never finished this political treatise. Death caught up with him first. It was February 21st, 1677. A cold, grey morning. Spinoza was in his rented room in The Hague, where he had moved a few years earlier. The doctor came to visit him. Spinoza knew it was the end. His lungs were failing, he could hardly breathe, but he was calm, completely calm. The doctor was with him. The landlord and his wife were there. There were not many people. Spinoza had no family. He had a few friends, but many were far away. He talked a little. His voice was weak but clear. He was not afraid. How could he be afraid? He had spent his whole life understanding that death was not the end of anything, just a transformation. The atoms that composed his body would continue to exist. The energy that animated his thoughts would continue to exist. He was returning to the infinite substance from which he had temporarily emerged. And then, calmly, he stopped breathing. Baruch Spinoza died at 44 years old. A short life, but a life that changed philosophy forever. His friends took care of the funeral. It was simple, nothing extravagant. Spinoza would not have wanted anything else. His body was buried in a local cemetery. No special tombstone, no monument, just a name and 2 dates. But his work was just beginning its journey. Spinoza's friends knew the value of what he had written. Immediately after his death, they began preparing the publication of his complete works. This was dangerous. Publishing Spinoza's writings could bring persecution, but they felt it was their duty. The world needed to know what this man had discovered. By the end of 1677, just a few months after Spinoza's death, his works were published. The Ethics, the unfinished political treatise, Correspondences, all together in one volume. The reaction was immediate and violent. Religious leaders across Europe denounced the book as the most dangerous work ever written. They said it was pure atheism, that it destroyed all morality, that it would lead society into chaos. Governments banned the book. The Catholic Church placed it on the index of prohibited books. Calvinist authorities ordered that all copies be burned. But it was too late. The book had already spread. Copies circulated secretly. Intellectuals read it in hiding. And even those who publicly denounced it were influenced by it in private. Because Spinoza's ideas had something that made them impossible to ignore. They were logically coherent. You could disagree. You could hate the conclusions. But you could not ignore the strength of the arguments. And slowly, very slowly, over the following decades and centuries, Spinoza's ideas began to permeate European thought. In the 18th century, Enlightenment philosophers were deeply influenced by Spinoza, even when they did not admit it. Voltaire read him. Diderot secretly admired him. The thinkers who created the intellectual foundation for the French Revolution were, unknowingly, following paths that Spinoza had opened. The idea that religion should not control the state. Spinoza. The idea that scriptures should be critically analyzed as historical texts. Spinoza. The idea that morality does not need a supernatural foundation, but can be based on a rational understanding of human nature. Spinoza. In the 19th century, Spinoza was rediscovered even more profoundly. German romantics adored him. Goethe said that reading Spinoza had changed his life. Schleiermacher translated him into German. Hegel incorporated him into his philosophical system. And then something unexpected happened. Spinoza, who had been expelled from Judaism, began to be claimed by Jewish thinkers as one of the greatest philosophers the Jewish people had ever produced. Even though he had rejected traditional Judaism, even though he had been cursed, he was Jewish, and his brilliant mind was a product, in part, of the Jewish intellectual tradition. In the 20th century, Einstein said he believed in the God of Spinoza. When asked about his religious faith, Einstein replied, "I believe in the God of Spinoza, who reveals himself in the ordered harmony of all that exists, not in a God who cares about the fate and actions of human beings." This phrase perfectly summarizes Spinoza's view. God is not a person. God is the order of the universe. The natural laws are the revelation of God. And when you understand these laws, when you see the harmony of the whole, you are experiencing God directly. Today, more than 3 centuries after his death, Spinoza is recognized as one of the greatest philosophers in history. His ideas about the relationship between mind and body anticipated modern neuroscience. His ideas about emotions anticipated psychology. His ideas about biblical interpretation founded modern textual criticism. His ideas about politics anticipated liberal democracy. But perhaps its most important contribution is something more subtle. It showed that it is possible to live without the comforting illusions of traditional religion and still have a life full of meaning. It showed that you do not need to believe in heaven and hell to be moral. You do not need to believe in free will to feel that your choices matter. You do not need to believe in a personal God to feel reverence for the universe. You can accept reality as it is, raw and unadorned, without comforting fantasies. And in that acceptance, in that clear understanding, you can find peace, you can find joy, you can find freedom. That was Spinoza's promise, and it is a promise that still resonates today, because we live in a time where many people have lost traditional faith, but have not found anything to replace it. They feel an emptiness. They feel that without God, everything is meaningless. Spinoza would say, "You have not lost God. You have merely lost a false image of God. The true God, the infinite substance, has always been here. It is in you. It is in everything. You just need to look. And when you look, when you truly see, then you realize something extraordinary. You realize that you are not alone. You never were. You are part of something immensely greater. You are the universe getting to know itself. You are God manifesting in this particular form, at this particular moment. And this is not a belief. It is not faith. It is a fact. You are made of atoms that were forged in the hearts of stars that died billions of years ago. You are composed of the same substance that makes up galaxies, oceans, mountains. There is no separation. There never was. So when you look at the night sky and see the stars, you are not looking at something foreign. You are looking at your own nature reflected back at you. When you feel the wind on your face, it is not something external touching you. It is God touching God. When you love someone, it is not one separate individual loving another separate individual. It is the infinite substance loving itself through two temporary forms. This is Spinoza's vision, and it is a vision that can completely transform your life experience. But let's be honest, Spinoza's philosophy is not easy to accept, because if you truly accept its implications, you have to abandon many things that people consider essential. You have to abandon the idea that you are special, not in the sense that you do not matter, but in the sense that you are not more important than anything else in the universe. You are not the center. You are just a part like everything else. You have to abandon the idea of cosmic justice. There is no one keeping score of your good and bad actions. There is no reward waiting after death. There is no punishment. Things simply happen according to natural laws. If something bad happens to you, it is not because you deserved it. If something good happens, it is not because you were virtuous. It is just nature being nature. You have to abandon the idea of universal purpose. The universe does not exist for anything. It has no goal. It is not going anywhere. It simply is. And you are part of that simply is. You have to abandon the idea that your thoughts are truly yours. Every thought you have is caused by something. Your past experiences, your biology, the present circumstances. You do not choose your thoughts any more than you choose your DNA. They simply arise. These are hard things to accept. Most people prefer to believe in free will, even if it is an illusion. They prefer to believe in purpose, even if it is invented. They prefer to believe in cosmic justice, even if there is no evidence. Why? Because these beliefs are comforting. They make the world seem less frightening, less random, less indifferent. But Spinoza would say, the consolation of illusion is not worth the price. The price is living in constant fear. Fear that you are not good enough for heaven. Fear that God is judging you. Fear that you deserve punishment. Fear that your life has no meaning if you do not follow the correct religious script. That fear is a prison, and the key to that prison is the truth. The truth that you do not need to earn your existence. You simply exist, and your existence is enough. Not because you are special, but because existence itself is valuable. Every manifestation of the infinite substance has value simply by existing. The truth that you do not need to earn love. Love is not a reward for good behavior. Love is a natural connection that arises when two parts of the infinite substance recognize each other. The truth that you do not need to fear death. Because death is not annihilation. It is transformation. The atoms continue, the energy continues. Only the particular form you take now dissolves. But here is the strange thing. When you accept all of this, when you truly internalize Spinoza's vision, something unexpected happens. You do not become depressed. You do not become nihilistic. You become free. Free from fear. Free from guilt. Free from the need for external approval. Free to simply be. And in that freedom, something arises that Spinoza called beatitude, a joy that does not depend on circumstances, a peace that cannot be disturbed by external events, because you have realized something fundamental. You are okay. You have always been okay. You will always be okay because you are part of something eternal and indestructible. The circumstances of your life may change. You may be rich or poor, healthy or sick, loved or rejected. But the essence of what you are, your participation in the infinite substance that never changes, that is permanent. Spinoza lived this. He lost everything: family, community, wealth, social status. But he did not lose himself, because he had understood that his true self was not Baruch Spinoza, the excommunicated Jew. His true self was the infinite substance expressing itself temporarily through the form of Baruch Spinoza, and that understanding made him invulnerable. Imagine having that kind of inner strength. Imagine not needing anyone's approval, not because you are arrogant, but because you have understood that external approval is irrelevant. Imagine not fearing death, not because you believe in an afterlife, but because you have understood that death is just a change of form. Imagine not being dominated by emotions, not because you suppress them, but because you understand them so deeply that they lose power over you. That is what Spinoza's philosophy promises, and it is not an empty promise. It is something that can be achieved through understanding, but it requires work, a lot of work. You need to study. You need to think deeply about the nature of reality. You need to examine your own emotions with brutal honesty. You need to question all the beliefs you have absorbed without thinking. And you need to meditate. Not traditional religious meditation, but philosophical meditation. Contemplating the nature of God. Contemplating your own nature as part of God. Contemplating the necessity of all things. Spinoza did this constantly. His friends reported that he often entered states of deep contemplation, where he seemed completely absorbed in thought. He was practicing what he preached. He was cultivating intuitive knowledge, the third and highest type of knowledge, and the results were visible. He was different from other people, calmer, more centered, happier in a subtle but undeniable way. People noticed this. Even those who violently disagreed with his ideas often commented that Spinoza personally was admirable, kind, generous, patient, never angry, never bitter despite all he had suffered. How did he manage this? Through understanding. He had understood that the people who persecuted him were not evil. They were just ignorant. They acted according to their natures, which had been shaped by their experiences and upbringing. He could not blame them any more than he could blame a wolf for hunting, so he responded to persecution with understanding. And that understanding disarmed hatred. Not always, not for everyone, but for many. And that is another lesson from Spinoza's philosophy. When you completely understand someone, when you see all the causes that made that person who they are, hatred becomes impossible. You can disagree, you can protect yourself if necessary, but you cannot hate. Because you see that the person could not be different given their nature and circumstances. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. Imagine applying this in your life. Imagine the boss who irritates you. If you completely understood why he acts that way, what in his history made him that way, would you still be irritated? Probably not. You would see a human being trapped in patterns they did not choose, doing the best they can with the mental tools they have. Imagine the politician you hate. If you completely understood their background, their beliefs, the pressures they face, would you still hate them? Probably not. No. You would see someone acting according to a worldview that, no matter how wrong it may seem to you, makes sense to them given their starting point. This is the promise of Spinoza's ethics, not a morality based on rules, not an ethics of duties and obligations, but an ethics based on understanding. When you understand, you act well naturally. Not because you must, but because it is the only thing that makes sense. Let's explore something Spinoza said that is still deeply controversial today. There is no absolute good and evil. That sounds shocking, right? How can a philosopher say that there is no good and evil? Doesn't that lead to total moral chaos? But Spinoza was not saying that everything is permitted. He was not saying that murder is as good as charity. He was saying something more subtle and deeper. He was saying that good and evil are not objective properties of things. They are human judgments based on how things affect us. We call something good when it increases our power to act, when it helps us thrive, when it contributes to our joy. We call something bad when it diminishes our power, when it harms us, when it causes suffering. But the thing itself is not good or bad. It just is. Think of a lion hunting a gazelle. From the lion's perspective, this is good. It gets food. It survives. From the gazelle's perspective, it is bad. It loses its life. But from the universe's perspective, it is neither good nor bad. It is just a natural event, a part of the cycle of life. Or think about rain. For a farmer during a drought, rain is good. For someone planning an outdoor wedding, rain is bad. But the rain itself is neither good nor bad. It just falls. Does this mean that morality is relative? That there is no difference between Hitler and Gandhi? No. Spinoza would say that there is definitely a difference. But the difference is not that one is objectively good and the other objectively bad in a cosmic sense. The difference is that one increased the power to act and the joy of millions, while the other caused immense suffering. And as human beings, we have an interest in promoting what increases our collective power to act and joy. So we establish laws, create social norms, develop ethics. Not because these things are absolute, but because they are useful for human survival and flourishing. This may seem cynical, but it is actually liberating, because it means that morality is not a mysterious set of rules carved in stone by God. It is something we build together, based on our understanding of human nature and what helps us thrive. And if it is something we build, then we can change it when it ceases to serve. We do not need to be stuck with old moral codes that made sense at one time, but no longer make sense now. For example, many religions have rules about food. Don't eat pork, don't mix meat and dairy, fast on certain days. Spinoza would say, these rules are not morally significant in themselves. They may have been useful at a certain time for reasons of health or social cohesion, but if they no longer serve those purposes, there is no reason to keep them. What matters is, does this increase or decrease human power to act? Does it contribute to joy or suffering? Those are the real questions. And here's something interesting. When you ask these questions honestly, you often arrive at moral conclusions similar to traditional religions. Do not kill. Do not steal. Do not lie. Help the needy. Why? Because these things promote functional societies where people can thrive. But you arrive at these conclusions for different reasons. Not because God commanded it, but because it makes sense, and when morality makes sense, you follow it voluntarily, not out of fear of punishment. Spinoza believed that most people are moral out of fear. Fear of hell, fear of divine punishment, fear of social ostracism. And this kind of morality is fragile, because when you remove fear, when you think you can escape unpunished, morality disappears. But morality based on understanding is strong. Because you act well not out of fear, but because you understand that it is in your interest to act well, not narrow selfish interest, but enlightened interest that recognizes that your flourishing is connected to the flourishing of others. Why? Because you are not separate from others. You are part of the same whole. When you harm another, you harm part of the system of which you are a part. When you help another, you strengthen the entire system, including yourself. This is not altruism in the usual sense. It is enlightened self-interest. It is recognizing that your well-being is intrinsically linked to the well-being of everything around you. Imagine understanding this deeply, not just intellectually, but viscerally. How would this change your behavior? You would probably be more compassionate, not because you should be, but because you understand that compassion serves your own deeper interest. You would be more generous, not out of moral obligation, but because you understand that giving strengthens the connections that sustain you too. You would be more honest, not out of fear of being caught lying, but because you understand that dishonesty erodes the trust that makes social life possible. This is Spinozist ethics, not based on external commandments, based on understanding the interconnected nature of reality. And here's something radical. Spinoza would say that you cannot blame people for their bad actions, not in the deep sense, because they act according to their natures which have been shaped by causes beyond their control. Does this mean we shouldn't punish criminals? No. Spinoza would say that we still need to protect society, but punishment should be preventive and educational, not vengeful. We are not punishing because the criminal deserves to suffer in the absolute moral sense. We are intervening because their actions are destructive, and we need to stop them. It's like when you restrain a rabid dog. You are not punishing the dog morally. You are protecting people. The dog did not choose to be rabid. It was infected. Similarly, the criminal did not choose to have the nature they have. They were shaped by genetics and environment. This does not mean we do not have responsibility. We do. But responsibility in the sense that we are part of the causal chain, and our actions have consequences. Not in the sense that we could have chosen differently in some magical way. This view is difficult for many people, because we want to believe in guilt and merit. We want to believe that when something bad happens to us, someone deserves to be punished, and when something good happens, we deserve a reward. But Spinoza would say this is yet another comforting illusion. The universe does not care about merit. It has no scoring system. Things happen according to natural laws, not according to what should happen morally. And accepting this is liberating, because it means you can stop feeling guilty about things you could not control. You can stop resenting people who harmed you because they could not have acted differently given their natures. You can stop expecting the universe to be fair because it never was and never will be. Instead, you can focus on what you can do now. You can use your understanding to make better choices, not because you have magical free will, but because understanding itself changes the causal chain. When you understand better, you act better, automatically. So, we come to a crucial question. If Spinoza was right, if everything is necessary, if there is no free will, if God is not a person who cares about our choices, then what is the point? Why do anything? Why strive? Why not just give up and let life happen? This is the objection people always make against determinism. They say, if everything is determined, then it doesn't matter what I do. I am just a robot executing a program. My choices are not real, so why choose anything? But Spinoza would say that this objection is based on misunderstanding. First, your choices are real. They happen. You deliberate, you decide, you act. The fact that this entire process is caused does not make it any less real. It is as real as anything else in the universe. Second, your choices have consequences. If you choose to study, you learn. If you choose to exercise, you get stronger. If you choose to be kind, you build connections. The consequences are real even if the choices are determined. Third, and most importantly, understanding that your choices are determined does not make you stop choosing. You continue to deliberate, continue to decide, continue to act. Because that is your nature. You are a part of nature that has the capacity to think and choose. That is what you are. Spinoza would say, the mistake is to think that free will is necessary for life to have meaning. It is not. Life has the meaning you give it through your actions, and these actions are real and important, even if they are determined. Think about that. Another way. An acorn is determined to grow into an oak, not a pine. It has no free will. But does that make its growth meaningless? No. It still grows, still transforms into a magnificent tree, still produces acorns that generate new trees. You are like the seed. You have a nature, and your life is the unfolding of that nature in interaction with the environment. You did not choose your initial nature, but you are that nature expressing itself, and there is beauty in that. There is meaning in that. Meaning does not come from being free of the causal chain. Meaning comes from being part of the causal chain, a unique part that has never existed before and will never exist again in exactly the same way. Spinoza lived this. He could have given up after excommunication. He could have said, I have no free will, so it doesn't matter what I do. But he did not say that. He kept studying, thinking, writing. Why? Because it was his nature. Because he could do nothing else. And in that not being able to do anything else was his freedom. This is the great Spinozist paradox. You are freer when you accept that you are not free. Because when you accept that you act according to your nature, you stop fighting against your nature. You stop trying to be what you are not. You simply are. And there is immense liberation in that simple being. Let's talk about something Spinoza said that many consider his most radical idea. You are God. Not in the sense that you are all-powerful, not in the sense that you created the universe, but in the sense that you are an expression of God, a mode of God, a form that the infinite substance temporarily takes on. Imagine the ocean. Each wave is part of the ocean. The wave is not separate from the ocean. The wave is the ocean, just organized in a particular way for a moment. When the wave breaks, it does not cease to exist. It simply returns to the non-wave form of the ocean. You are a wave in the ocean of God. This means that when you think, it is God thinking through you. When you feel, it is God feeling. When you act, it is God acting. There is no separation. There never was. The illusion of separation is what causes all suffering. You think I and world, when I and God, I and others. But these divisions are artificial. They are useful for practical purposes, like when the wave distinguishes itself from other waves. But they are not real in the ultimate sense. And when you realize this, when you truly see that there is no separation, something extraordinary happens. You cease to be afraid. Because what is there to fear? You cannot be destroyed because you were never separate. You have always been part of the whole. You always will be. You cease to feel lonely because you have never been alone. You have always been connection. You are connection. Every atom of yours is connected to every other atom in the universe through the causal web that Spinoza called God. You cease to feel envy because there is no other to envy. When you see someone thriving, you are seeing God thriving. And you are God too. So, in a real sense, their success is your success. You cease to feel hatred because there is no real enemy. There are only different expressions of God, some of which come into conflict. But conflict is like waves colliding. It happens. But it is not personal. It is not good against evil. It is just nature being nature. This is not a religious belief. Spinoza is not asking you to have faith. He is asking you to see. Look at your hand. It is made up of cells. The cells are made up of molecules. The molecules are made up of atoms. The atoms are made up of subatomic particles. And these particles are, fundamentally, energy. Energy that came from the Big Bang. Energy that was there at the beginning of the universe. You are literally holding pieces of the beginning of time. You are ancient beyond imagination. And you are new because this particular configuration of atoms has never existed before. You are eternity and moment at the same time. This is Spinoza's vision. And if you truly internalize it, if it stops being an idea and becomes direct perception, then you achieve what he called intuitive knowledge of God. And with that knowledge comes beatitude, serene joy, unshakable peace. Not because your life becomes easy, not because your problems disappear, but because you have understood something so profound that no external problem can fundamentally disturb you. You have understood that you are okay, you always were, you always will be. Because you are the universe experiencing itself, you are God waking up to itself, and that is miraculous, even though it is completely natural. Spinoza died over 3 centuries ago, but his message is still here, waiting to be understood, waiting to free anyone who has the courage to truly look, truly see, truly accept. The truth is that you do not need salvation, because you were never lost. You do not need redemption, because you never fell. You do not need an intermediary to reach God, because you are already God. You just forgot. And the work is not to become something you are not. The work is to remember what you always were. Now let's dive into something Spinoza said that can completely change the way you see your own emotions. He developed what can be called the first complete system of rational psychology, centuries before Freud, Jung, or any other modern psychologist. Spinoza realized something that most people never realize. Our emotions are not random. They do not simply appear out of nowhere. Each emotion has a cause, and if you understand the cause, you can understand the emotion. And when you understand the emotion, it loses power over you. He began by identifying 3 primary emotions from which all others derive: desire, joy, and sadness. Everything else is a variation or combination of these 3. Desire, he said, is simply the effort of each thing to persist in its being. This is the most fundamental law of nature. Everything that exists tries to continue existing. A stone desires to maintain its structural integrity. A plant desires light and water. An animal desires food and safety. And a human desires many things. But at the root, all human desires are manifestations of this fundamental effort to persist and thrive. Joy is what we feel when our power to act increases, when something helps us persist better, function better, be more of what we are. It can be food when we are hungry. It can be knowledge when we are curious. It can be connection when we are lonely. Anything that increases our power to be what we are produces joy. Sadness is the opposite. It is what we feel when our power to act decreases, when something hinders us, blocks us, weakens us. An illness diminishes our power. A loss diminishes our power. A failure diminishes our power, and we feel sadness. Now, all other emotions are combinations or variations of these three basics. Let's explore a few. Love is joy accompanied by the idea of an external cause. You love something when it brings you joy and you associate that joy with it. It can be a person. It can be a place. It can be an activity. When you think of that, you feel joy. That is love. Hatred is sadness accompanied by the idea of an external cause. You hate something when it brings you sadness and you associate that sadness with it. Someone harmed you, something blocked you, and when you think of it, you feel sadness. That is hatred. Hope is unstable joy that arises from the idea of something future or past about which we doubt. You hope that something good will happen, but you are not sure. So you feel joy mixed with anxiety. That is hope. Fear is unstable sadness that arises from the idea of something future or past about which we doubt. You fear that something bad will happen, but you are not sure. So you feel sadness mixed with anxiety. That is fear. Spinoza realized something crucial. Hope and fear always come together. You cannot have one without the other, because both are based on uncertainty about the future. When you hope for something good, you automatically fear not achieving it. And when you fear something bad, you automatically hope to avoid it. And this leads to a radical conclusion. The truly wise person has neither hope nor fear. Why? Because they have understood that the future is determined. Things will happen as they must happen. Hope and fear are based on the illusion that the future is open, that your concerns can change it, but they cannot. So the wise do not hope or fear. They act. They do what they can with the circumstances they have, but they do not waste emotional energy hoping for specific outcomes, because they have understood that the outcomes will come from the natural process of causes and effects, not from their hopes or fears. This may seem cold, but in reality it is liberating. Think about how much of your life you spend waiting and fearing. Waiting to get that job, fearing that you won't get it, waiting for that person to love you, fearing that they won't love you, waiting for success, fearing failure. All that emotional energy wasted on things that haven't happened yet and that you cannot control. And in the meantime, you are not fully present in the current moment, which is the only real moment that exists. The wise Spinozist is always present, always acting from the current moment, not trapped in hopes about the future or fears about the future, simply responding to what is, here and now. Let's explore more emotions. Envy is sadness at seeing another's joy. Why do we feel envy? Spinoza would say because we have the mistaken idea that joy is a limited resource. We think that if the other has joy, there is less left for us. But that is an illusion. Joy is not a cake that needs to be divided. It is something that can be multiplied infinitely. Another's joy does not diminish your capacity to feel joy, unless you think it does, and then that very belief causes sadness. Pity is sadness at seeing another's sadness. That seems good, right? Compassion is a virtue. But Spinoza makes a subtle distinction. Pity, feeling another's pain as if it were your own, actually diminishes your power, because now you are suffering too, and two suffering is not better than one. What is better? Compassionate understanding without emotional identification. You see that the other suffers. You understand the causes of suffering, and you act to help if you can. But you do not suffer along with them, because your suffering does not help anyone. It only adds more suffering to the world. This is difficult, because we have been taught that feeling with the other is the definition of compassion. But Spinoza would say, true compassion is wanting to increase the other's power to act, not diminishing your own power by absorbing their suffering. Think of a doctor. A good doctor does not feel the patient's physical pain. If they did, they could not function. They see the pain, understand the cause, and act to relieve it. But they maintain their mental clarity. Spinoza is saying, do the same with emotional pain. See, understand, help, but do not absorb. Humility. Spinoza said something controversial about this. He said that humility, in the sense of thinking poorly of oneself, is sadness. It is a diminishment of your power. It is not a virtue. It is weakness. This seems strange because all religions exalt humility. But Spinoza would say, what religions call humility is often just self-deprecation. It makes you think you are nothing, that you are a sinner, that you are unworthy, and that weakens you. It makes you easier to control. True virtue is not thinking poorly of yourself. It is realistically understanding what you are, your capabilities and limitations, without inflation, but also without deflation. You are what you are, a particular expression of God with particular capabilities. Recognizing this clearly is wisdom, not arrogance. Pride, in the sense of thinking more of oneself than one should, is also an error, but not because it is a sin, simply because it is an illusion. And illusion always leads to problems. If you think you can do something that you cannot, you will fail, and failure will teach you better. Reality always wins. Regret is sadness at thinking about something you did. Spinoza had an interesting view on this. He said, regret is doubly bad. First, you did something that diminished your power. Second, now you are diminishing your power again by feeling bad about it. So you harm yourself twice. But what about moral guilt? Shouldn't we regret when we do something wrong? Spinoza would say, what you call wrong is simply something that diminished your power or the power of others. If you understand why it was a mistake, you learn and do not repeat it. But regretting does not help. It only adds more suffering. This does not mean acting carelessly. It means acting with understanding. And when you err, learn and move on, not getting stuck in guilt that serves no purpose. Gratitude, love, or the desire to do good to those who have done good to you is a positive emotion. It increases your power because it strengthens beneficial connections. Spinoza would say, be grateful, not out of moral obligation, but because gratitude naturally leads you to strengthen relationships that benefit you. It is enlightened selfishness. Revenge is the desire to harm those who have harmed you. It seems satisfying to imagine, but Spinoza would say, it is foolish. Why? Because when you seek revenge, you are letting the other control your actions. You are spending your power trying to diminish their power, and in the process you likely diminish your own power more than theirs. The wise do not seek revenge, not because it is good in the conventional moral sense, but because they understand that revenge is a waste of energy that could be used for more productive things. This does not mean allowing others to harm you repeatedly. It means protecting yourself rationally, without the emotion of revenge. You set boundaries. You distance yourself from harmful situations, but you do not spend energy hating and plotting revenge, because that only keeps you tied to the past and to the other. Spinoza was essentially describing what we today call emotional intelligence, but he went much further than any modern theory, because he not only described emotions, he showed how they necessarily arise from our relationship with the world, and he showed the path to emotional liberation through understanding. The key is always the same: understand the causes. When you feel anger, do not just feel it. Investigate. What caused that anger? What belief or expectation was violated? Why do you have that belief or expectation? Is it rational? Is it helpful? If not, can you change it? And if you change the belief, the anger disappears automatically. This is not repression. Repression is pushing the emotion down without resolving it. What Spinoza proposes is dissolution through understanding. The emotion literally dissolves when you fully understand its causes and realize that they do not make sense. It is like when you are afraid of the dark as a child, but then someone turns on the light and you see that there is nothing scary there. The fear disappears instantly, not because you repressed it, but because the cause of the fear, your belief that there was something dangerous, was revealed as false. Spinoza is saying, do this with all your emotions. Turn on the light of understanding, and watch how many of your emotions that seemed absolutely real and justified reveal themselves to be based on false beliefs or illusions, and those that remain, the ones based on a clear understanding of reality, those you keep. But now they are rational emotions, not passions that dominate you. You feel them, but you are not dominated by them. This is the promise of Spinozist psychology, not to eliminate emotions, but to transform them from blind forces that control you into understood phenomena that you observe with clarity. And in that clarity, there is freedom. Let's explore one of the deepest and most disturbing implications of Spinoza's philosophy. If there is no free will, what happens to personal responsibility? What happens to justice? What happens to the entire moral and legal system upon which our society is built? These are not abstract questions. They are practical issues that affect how we treat each other, how we structure our laws, how we educate our children. Spinoza was deeply aware of these implications, and he did not avoid them. He faced them directly. First, let's clarify what Spinoza really said about free will. He did not say that we are robots without agency. He did not say that our choices do not matter. He said something more subtle. Every choice we make is the necessary result of our nature combined with the circumstances. We could not have chosen differently given who we are and the situation we were in. But here is the crucial point. Who you are changes all the time. Every experience modifies you. Every thought modifies you. Every choice modifies you. So, although you could not have chosen differently at that moment, you can become someone who would choose differently in future situations. How? Through understanding. When you understand why you made certain choices, when you see the causes, you can intervene in those causes. Not magically, but through the natural process of learning and change. Think of someone who has a problem with anger. They explode constantly, then they regret it. They promise to change, but they explode again. Why? Because they have not understood the deep causes of their anger. They just try to suppress it, which does not work. But if they investigate, if they truly understand that their anger arises from specific beliefs about how the world should be, about how people should treat them, and if they examine those beliefs and realize that they are irrational, then something changes. Not because they decided to change through magical free will, but because real understanding changes who you are. And when you are different, you act differently. Spinoza essentially describes what we today call cognitive therapy, centuries before it was invented. The idea that by changing your thought patterns, you can change your emotions and behaviors. But he went deeper, because he not only offered techniques, he offered a complete metaphysical understanding of why these techniques work. They work because thoughts are real causes in the world. When you change your thoughts, you are changing the causal chain that determines your behavior. So returning to the question of responsibility, are we responsible for our actions? Spinoza would say yes and no, not in the sense that we could have acted differently at that exact moment, but yes in the sense that our actions have consequences, and those consequences fall upon us. And we, as rational beings, can learn from the consequences and modify ourselves. Think about how we deal with children. When a small child touches a hot stove, they get burned. They did not have free will in the deep sense. They touched it because they were curious and ignorant of the dangers. But pain teaches. The next time, they do not touch. Not because they freely decided, but because the structure of their mind was modified by the experience. Spinoza would say, we are all like children touching stoves. We do things. We suffer consequences. We learn. We change. And this process is determined, but it is also real and effective. So how does this apply to the justice system? Spinoza would say, punishment should not be vindictive. We are not punishing because the criminal deserves to suffer in some cosmic sense. We are intervening in a problematic causal chain. Someone commits a crime. Why? Because their nature, shaped by genetics and environment, combined with certain circumstances, led to that action. They could not have acted differently at that moment. So moral guilt in the absolute sense does not make sense. But does that mean we do nothing? No. We need to protect society. We need to intervene. But the form of intervention should be different. Instead of focusing on punishment, focus on modifying the causes. This means education, therapy, changing circumstances that lead to crime, and when necessary, separation from society to protect others. But not with hatred, not with vengeance, with understanding that we are dealing with a person whose nature needs to be modified or whose circumstances need to be controlled. Does this sound very soft? Spinoza would say, it is not about being soft or hard. It is about being effective. Punitive systems based on vengeance do not work well. People leave prison and commit crimes again because the underlying causes have not been addressed. They have only been punished, which often makes them more bitter and more prone to crime. Systems focused on rehabilitation and modification of causes work better, not perfectly. because some natures are hard to modify, but better than pure punishment, and for cases where a person's nature is so destructive that it cannot be modified. Spinoza would say, unfortunately, sometimes permanent confinement is necessary, not as punishment, but as recognition that this person is a danger that cannot be neutralized in any other way. It is like quarantining a disease. We are not blaming the person for being sick, we are protecting others. Does this sound cold? Perhaps. But Spinoza would say it is more humane than the current system, because it does not add moral cruelty on top of practical necessity. We do not say, you are evil and deserve to suffer. We say, you are dangerous and need to be contained. It is neutral, factual, without the poison of moral judgment. And for the person themselves, this approach is potentially more liberating, because if someone believes they are intrinsically evil, that they deserve punishment, that they are guilty in the absolute sense, it is hard to change. But if they understand that destructive actions came from specific causes in their history and nature, causes that can be modified, there is hope for real change. Now let's go deeper. What does this view mean for how we live our own lives? If you accept that you do not have free will, how does that affect your daily choices? Spinoza would say, it does not change the fact that you choose. You still deliberate about what to do, you still weigh options, you still decide. All of this continues to happen. The process of choice is real. What changes is that you stop blaming yourself when you make a mistake. You understand that at that moment, given who you were and the circumstances, you could not have chosen differently. So you stop carrying useless guilt, you learn and move on, and you stop blaming others too. When someone harms you, you understand that they acted according to their natures. You can protect yourself, you can set boundaries, you can even cut ties, but you do not carry poisonous resentment, because you see that they could not have acted differently at that moment. This does not mean staying in abusive situations. It means leaving them without hatred. It means protecting yourself with rational clarity, not with vengeful emotion. And perhaps most importantly, you stop living with anxiety about making the right choice, because you understand that you will make the choice that your nature and circumstances determine. You cannot fail to make the right choice, because the choice you make will necessarily be the choice that had to be made. Does this seem to remove all motivation to do better? Spinoza would say no, because your desire to do better, to understand more, to grow, that desire is part of your nature. If you have that desire, you will act according to it. You cannot not act according to it. It is who you are. And if you do not have that desire, then you do not. And you will act according to the nature you have. There is no moral guilt in that. But there are consequences, and the consequences teach, and the teaching modifies, and the modification changes future actions. The whole process is determined, but it is also a real process of growth and change. Spinoza lived this. He had no anxiety about his choices. He simply lived according to his nature, which was to philosophize, to think, to seek understanding. He did not blame himself when he was wrong about something. He just learned and refined his thinking, and he did not blame those who persecuted him. He just protected himself and continued his work. And the result? A life of remarkable serenity amidst difficult circumstances. This is what Spinoza's philosophy promises. Not happiness in the sense of constant pleasure, but serenity in the sense of deep peace that comes from understanding your nature and fully accepting the necessity of all things. Now we need to talk about something Spinoza said that was considered completely heretical, even more heretical than his denial of free will. He said that God has no intellect or will. God does not think. God does not choose. God does not care. This seems to be the end of any religiosity. If God does not think, does not choose, does not care, then why pray? Why worship? Why have a relationship with God? And Spinoza's answer is, you should not have a relationship with God in the traditional sense, because relationship implies two separate beings. But you are not separate from God. You are God. So you cannot have a relationship with yourself in the way you have a relationship with another, but you can understand your own nature. And this understanding is what Spinoza called the intellectual love of God. It is not emotional, romantic love between two people. It is something completely different. It is the joy that comes from understanding the necessity of your own existence as part of the infinite whole. Let me try to explain this in another way. When you deeply understand a mathematical truth, You feel a certain kind of intellectual pleasure. You see how everything fits together, how the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. There is beauty in that necessity. Spinoza is saying, you can have a similar experience in relation to your own existence. When you understand that you exist necessarily, that you are a necessary manifestation of the laws of nature, that you could not fail to exist in this form at this moment, there is joy in that. There is beauty in necessity. And when you understand that this is true not just for you, but for everything, that everything exists necessarily, that the entire universe is a perfectly coherent system of causes and effects, you feel reverence. Not reverence for a separate being, but reverence for the structure of reality itself. This is what Spinoza called the love of God. And he said something remarkable. This love is eternal, not in the sense that it continues after death, but in the sense that when you understand eternal truths, you are participating in eternity. You are thinking the eternal thoughts that are, in a certain sense, the thoughts of God. Because remember, for Spinoza, God is not a person who thinks. God is the totality of everything that exists. But you, as part of God, think. And when you think about eternal truths, about the necessary structure of reality, you are having the experience closest possible to knowing the mind of God, which in fact is knowing the logical structure of reality itself. It may sound abstract. Let's make it concrete. Think of a physicist studying the fundamental laws of the universe. He discovers that certain equations govern how everything works. And he sees that these equations are elegant, beautiful, necessary. They could not be different. If they were different, the universe could not exist. When he understands this, he feels something: joy, awe, reverence. Einstein spoke about this feeling. He called it the cosmic religious feeling. And he said it was what motivated great scientists. Spinoza is saying, this feeling is the love of God, not the love of a person in the sky, but the love of the structure of reality, the love of the eternal laws that make everything exist. And here is something profound. This love does not require reciprocity. God does not love you back, because God is not a person with emotions, but that does not make the love any less real or less valuable. On the contrary, it is the purest love possible, because it expects nothing in return. It seeks no reward. It is simply the joy of understanding. Compare this with traditional theistic love. You love God, and you expect God to love you back, and you fear that if you do not love God the right way, He will punish you. So there is always anxiety, always fear, always a need to please. The Spinozist love does not have this anxiety, because there is no one to please. There is only truth to understand, and understanding itself brings joy. There are no conditions, there are no tests, there is no judgment. You exist, and your existence is part of the necessary perfection of the whole. You do not need to deserve to exist. You simply exist. And when you understand this, you free yourself from all existential anxiety. This seems very different from traditional religion, and it is. Spinoza was essentially proposing a new form of spirituality, a spirituality without a personal God, without heaven or hell, without salvation or condemnation, but still a spirituality, because it still offers something that humans seek in religion, connection with something greater than the individual self, a sense of purpose, inner peace. The difference is that this spirituality is based on understanding, not on faith. It is based on reason, not on revelation. It is based on direct experience of the structure of reality, not on obedience to religious authorities. And Spinoza said that this spirituality is superior, not in a moral sense, but in the sense that it works better. It produces more peace, more joy, more freedom. Because it does not depend on external things, it depends only on your own capacity to understand. No one can take that away from you. You can lose everything, as Spinoza did. But if you have understood, you still have that understanding. And with it you have peace. Let's explore another radical aspect of Spinoza's thought about God. He said that God does not act for a purpose. God has no objectives. The universe is not going anywhere. It has no goal. It has no destination. This completely destroys the idea of divine providence, the idea that God has a plan for you, for humanity, for the universe. Spinoza said, this is anthropomorphic fantasy. We are projecting our own way of thinking onto God. We humans act for purposes. We have goals. We make plans. And then we imagine that God must also act this way, only on a larger scale. But Spinoza said, this is a mistake. God does not act like a human, because God is not human. God is not a person. So why do things exist, not for a purpose, but out of necessity? The laws of nature are what they are. And given those laws, certain things have to exist. You exist because the causes that brought you into being existed and operated according to natural laws. Not because God wanted you to exist, but because you could not help but exist given the causes. This removes cosmic purpose. But Spinoza would say, this is good, because belief in cosmic purpose creates anxiety. You worry if you are fulfilling God's purpose, if you are on the right path, if you are pleasing God. And that worry is useless, because there is no purpose to fulfill. But then does life have no meaning? Spinoza would say, life has no meaning given from the outside. But you can create meaning. How? Through your own choices about what to value, what to pursue, how to live. There is no cosmic meaning, but there is personal meaning. And that personal meaning is real, even if it is not cosmic. Your decision to love someone creates meaning. Your decision to create something creates meaning. Your decision to seek understanding creates meaning, and that meaning is not less for being created by you instead of given by God. It may even be greater, because it is yours. You chose it. It is an expression of your nature, which is an expression of God. Spinoza had an interesting view on miracles that follows from this understanding of God. He said, miracles do not exist, not in the sense of violations of natural laws, because natural laws are the laws of God. They are expressions of God's necessary nature. For God to violate those laws would be for God to violate his own nature, which is impossible. So when the Bible describes miracles, what is happening? Either they are natural events misunderstood, interpreted as miraculous by people ignorant of natural causes, or they are metaphors, stories invented to teach moral lessons. For example, the parting of the Red Sea. Spinoza said, perhaps there was a strong wind at the right time that temporarily lowered the water level in a shallow area, and the Hebrews passed through, and then the wind stopped and the water returned, and the Egyptians drowned. A lucky coincidence for the Hebrews, but not a violation of natural laws. Or perhaps the whole story is invented to symbolize liberation from slavery. It does not matter if it happened literally. What matters is the lesson. It is possible to escape oppression. This approach to miracles was completely radical. Spinoza was essentially founding what we now call historical biblical criticism, the idea that sacred texts should be analyzed like any other historical document, not accepted unquestioningly as the literal word of God. And the implications were devastating for religious authority. Because if the Bible is not the literal word of God, if miracles did not happen, if prophets did not have supernatural knowledge, then why obey religious authorities that base their power on those claims? Spinoza was essentially saying, you do not need them. You can have direct access to the truth through your own reason. You can understand God directly through understanding nature. You do not need intermediaries. This message was immensely dangerous to the religious status quo, and that is why they tried to silence him. Because if people really believed this, the entire structure of religious power would crumble. But Spinoza was not interested in power. He was interested in truth, and he believed that truth would eventually prevail. Perhaps not in his lifetime, perhaps not for centuries, but eventually. Because truth has its own power. Power that does not need swords or bonfires. It only needs willing minds to think. Let's talk about something Spinoza said about the good life, about what it means to live well. He did not offer a list of commandments. He did not say, do this, do not do that. Instead, he offered a unifying principle: seek to understand. And from understanding, everything else follows naturally. The good life, for Spinoza, is a life dedicated to knowledge. Not superficial knowledge, not the accumulation of trivial facts, but deep understanding of the nature of reality, including your own nature. Why knowledge? Because knowledge increases your power to act. The more you understand, the better you can navigate the world, the better you can achieve your goals, the better you can avoid unnecessary suffering. And at the highest level, knowledge brings beatitude. When you understand eternal truths, when you see the necessity of everything, when you realize your connection to the infinite whole, You experience joy that does not depend on external circumstances. This is the greatest good possible. But Spinoza was also realistic. He knew that most people would not reach this level of understanding. Most would continue living at the first level of knowledge, opinion, believing what they were taught without questioning. And that is okay. Spinoza was not elitist in the sense of looking down on ordinary people. He recognized that different people have different capacities and interests. Not everyone wants or can become philosophers, but he believed that everyone could improve their lives through more understanding, even if they did not reach the highest level. Any movement towards greater understanding is valuable, because any understanding increases your power and decreases your suffering. So how do you start? Spinoza would say, start by observing your own emotions. The next time you feel anger, do not just feel it. Observe. Where does that anger come from? What thought preceded it? What belief is behind it? Is that belief true? That simple act of observation already begins to transform the experience. The emotion is still there, but now there is a part of you observing, and that observing part is your rational power beginning to work. Keep doing this. Observe fear. Observe envy. Observe desire. Do not judge the emotions as good or bad. Just observe, investigate, understand, and over time you will notice something. Emotions begin to lose intensity. They do not disappear, but they no longer dominate you in the same way, because now there is understanding. And understanding is the antidote to emotional domination. Spinoza also had surprisingly modern practical advice about relationships. He said, seek to be with people who increase your power to act. Avoid people who diminish you. This seems obvious, but think about how many times you ignore this principle. How many times do you maintain relationships that clearly harm you, out of obligation, out of fear of being alone, out of hope that the person will change? Spinoza would say, be rational. If a relationship consistently diminishes your power, if it makes you sad, anxious, angry, then that relationship is not good for you. And it is not selfish to recognize this. It is wisdom. This does not mean abandoning people at the first problem. It means recognizing when a relationship is fundamentally destructive versus when it is just going through a difficult phase but is basically healthy. How to differentiate? Spinoza would say, observe the long-term pattern. Does the relationship generally strengthen you or weaken you? Do you generally feel joy or sadness in relation to it? If it is mostly weakening and sad, it is destructive. If it is mostly strengthening and joyful, it is healthy. And when you are in healthy relationships, Spinoza said, invest in them, strengthen them, because they increase your power and your joy. It is in your interest to maintain and develop connections that benefit you. But do this not out of obligation or fear, but out of understanding that it is good for you. This is the difference between Spinozist ethics and traditional ethics. Traditional says, you should be good to others because it is your duty. Spinoza says, be good to others because it is in your interest. When you strengthen others, you strengthen the web of connections of which you are a part. This may seem cynical, but Spinoza would say it is honest. And honesty is healthier than pretending that you act for purely altruistic reasons, when in fact there is always an element of self-interest. It is better to recognize self-interest and then act in ways that serve your enlightened interest, which includes the well-being of others, recognizing that you are connected to others. Spinoza had an interesting view on work. He said, choose work that uses your natural abilities, because when you do what your nature inclines you to do, you strengthen yourself. When you fight against your nature, you weaken yourself. This does not mean doing only what is easy. It means doing what is natural for you, even if it is challenging. There is a difference between a challenge that strengthens you because it is aligned with your abilities, and a struggle that weakens you because it is against your nature. Spinoza chose to polish lenses and philosophize, not because it was easy, but because it was natural for him. His mind was naturally inclined to philosophy, so he followed it. And although his life was difficult externally, internally he was doing exactly what his nature dictated, and that brought satisfaction. You may not have the freedom to choose any job. Circumstances may limit you. But even within limitations, you can seek what is most aligned with your nature, and that will make a difference in your satisfaction. Spinoza also said something interesting about pleasure. He was not against pleasure. He was not an ascetic who rejected all physical pleasures. But he made a distinction between pleasures that increase your long-term power and pleasures that diminish it. Eating when you are hungry is a pleasure that increases power. It gives you energy, sustains you. Eating compulsively until you are sick is a pleasure that diminishes power. It weakens you. Sex in the context of loving connection is a pleasure that increases power. It strengthens bonds, brings joy. Compulsive sex that harms other relationships or your own dignity is a pleasure that diminishes power. The criterion is always, does this increase or decrease my long-term power? If it increases, it is good. If it decreases, it is bad. Simple. This approach eliminates much of the moral guilt that traditional religions place around pleasure. Spinoza would not say that pleasure is sin. He would say that some pleasures are wise and others are foolish, depending on their effects on your power. And here is something liberating. Spinoza said that the more you understand, the more you naturally gravitate towards wise pleasures. Not because you force yourself, but because understanding changes your desires. When you truly understand that a certain pleasure will harm you, you simply no longer want it in the same way. It is like when a child wants to play with fire. It seems fun, but then they get burned, and after the burn, they no longer want it. Not because someone told them it is wrong, but because they viscerally understood that it hurts. Spinoza is saying, do this with everything in life. Understand the real consequences of your choices, and then you will naturally choose better, not by willpower, but by understanding. This is the most human and realistic ethics. It does not require you to be a saint. It only requires you to be honest and rational. Observe what strengthens you. Do more of that. Observe what weakens you. Do less of that. Simple, but not easy. Because it requires brutal honesty with yourself. Most people do not want that honesty. They prefer comfortable illusions. They prefer to believe that they are victims of circumstances, that they have no power, that there is nothing they can do. But Spinoza would say, you have power, the power to understand, and through understanding, the power to change. Not a magical power to transcend causes, but a real power to modify causes by inserting a new cause, understanding. And that power is enough, not to control everything, but to live well, to find peace, to experience joy, even in difficult circumstances, as Spinoza did. Now we need to talk about something that many people find when they study Spinoza for the first time. His philosophy seems cold, emotionless, without compassion, just pure reason applied to everything, and this may seem inhumane, but it is a profound misunderstanding. Spinoza was not against emotion. He was against being dominated by emotions that weaken us. There is a huge difference. He recognized that we are emotional beings. Emotions are a fundamental part of our nature. You cannot eliminate them, and you should not try. What you can do is understand them, and through understanding, transform them from blind forces that dominate you into phenomena that you experience with awareness. But here is something that is often forgotten about Spinoza. He deeply valued certain emotions, particularly love and joy, because these emotions increase our power. They strengthen us. They connect us with others in beneficial ways. The problem is not feeling love or joy. The problem is when love becomes an obsessive attachment that enslaves us, or when the pursuit of joy becomes a chase for destructive pleasures. It is the distortion of emotions, not the emotions themselves, that causes problems, and Spinoza had a profound capacity for love. This is clear in his correspondence. He was kind to friends, patient with critics, generous with his time and knowledge. These are not actions of a cold person. They are actions of a person who understood that serving others is serving oneself, because we are all parts of the same whole. There is a wonderful story about Spinoza that illustrates this. One day a spider caught a fly in its web on Spinoza's window. He stopped his work and watched the struggle for a long time. When someone asked why he was so fascinated, he said he saw in the fly's struggle the entire human condition. The fly was trapped by causes it could not control. It struggled for a freedom it could not reach, and eventually, necessarily, it would be consumed. This story is often told as evidence that Spinoza was cold, that he saw humans as just insects trapped in deterministic webs. But I think it shows the opposite. It shows that he had deep compassion. He cared enough to watch, to think about the suffering of the fly, to see in it a reflection of all suffering. And then he spent his life trying to show other humans how to escape the web. Not the web of causes, because there is no escape from that, but the web of illusions that makes the causes unbearable. The illusion that you should be free when you are not. The illusion that you deserve to suffer when you do not. The illusion that you are alone when in fact you are part of the whole infinite. Freeing people from these illusions was the work of his life. This is not the action of a cold person. It is the action of a person who loves deeply, even if that love is different from romantic or familial love. Let's talk about another often misunderstood aspect. Spinoza's view of God seems to eliminate the sacred. If God is just nature, if there is nothing supernatural, if everything is just atoms and physical laws, then there is no mystery, no transcendence, no sacred. But again, this is a misunderstanding. For Spinoza, everything is sacred, because everything is God. Every tree is sacred, every stone is sacred, every person is sacred, not in the sense that it should be worshipped, but in the sense that it is a manifestation of the divine. In fact, the Spinoza's vision makes more things sacred, not less. In traditional religions, there is a division between the sacred and the profane. The church is sacred, the market is profane. Sunday is sacred, Monday is profane. The priest is sacred, the merchant is profane. But for Spinoza, there is no such division. Everything equally participates in the divine nature. There is no hierarchy of holiness. The stone in the path is as divine as the consecrated host, because both are modes of God. This may seem to desacralize everything, but in fact it sacralizes everything. When you realize that God is in everything, you treat everything with reverence, not formal religious reverence, but a deep appreciation for the wonder of existence. Spinoza felt this. He looked at the lens he was polishing and saw a miracle, a piece of sand transformed into glass that allows for better vision, the entire chain of causes that led to that moment, the stars that created the atoms, the earth that organized them, the life that evolved to create beings capable of making tools. And now he, Spinoza, continuing that chain, creating a lens that might allow someone to see the stars more clearly, closing the circle. This is seeing the sacred in everything, not because it is supernatural, but because it is. And being itself is miraculous enough. Einstein understood this when he said he believed in the God of Spinoza. He saw in the equations of physics something more than mere facts. He saw beauty. He saw necessity. He saw something that can only be called divine, even if it is completely natural. This is spirituality for the scientific age. It does not require you to believe in things that contradict science, but it also does not reduce everything to mere meaningless matter. There is a third way, to see the divine in the natural, to see that the natural itself is so wonderful that it does not need the supernatural to be revered. Now Spinoza would be the first to admit that his philosophy is not for everyone. It requires a certain type of mind, a mind that can find satisfaction in abstract understanding, a mind that does not need the emotional comfort of a celestial father, a mind that can face bare truth without comforting fantasies. Not everyone has or wants to have this type of mind, and that is perfectly fine. Spinoza recognized that traditional religion, even though based on illusions, can be useful for many people. If someone needs to believe in a personal God to be moral and happy, then let them believe. There is no need to destroy illusions that are useful. But for those who can no longer believe in illusions, for those whose reason has destroyed comforting fantasies, Spinoza offered an alternative, a way to live without illusions, a way to find peace through understanding instead of faith, a way to be spiritual without being superstitious. And this alternative is precious, because there are many people today who have lost faith but have not found anything to replace it. They feel empty. They feel that without traditional God, nothing matters. Spinoza would say to these people, you have not lost God. You have only lost a false image of God. The true God, which is nature, has always been here. It is in you. And when you understand this, when you truly see this, the emptiness will disappear, because you will realize that you have never been empty. You have always been full, full of the infinite substance that is God. And you do not need salvation, because you have never been lost. You do not need redemption, because you have never fallen. You have just forgotten what you are. And the work is to remember. How do you remember? Through study, through contemplation, through careful observation of your own mind and emotions, through understanding how the universe works, through seeing the connection between everything. It is work. It requires discipline, but it is work that brings incomparable reward. Not reward in heaven after death, but reward here and now. Peace, joy, freedom. Not freedom to do whatever you want, but freedom to be who you are. And in the modern age where so many are lost, this freedom is a precious gift. Let us conclude this journey by talking about Spinoza's legacy and what his ideas mean for us today, living in a world so different from his. When Spinoza died in 1677, he was widely considered the most dangerous man in Europe. His books were banned. His name was synonymous with atheism and immorality. Parents used his name to scare children. Preachers denounced him from the pulpits. He was the philosophical monster of the age. But something strange happened over the centuries. Slowly, very slowly, his ideas began to be accepted. Not entirely, not by everyone, but by a growing number of people. Today, many of the ideas for which he was excommunicated and denounced are widely accepted, at least in intellectual circles. The idea that the Bible should be studied critically as a historical document, the idea that religion should not control the state, the idea that morality can be based on reason rather than divine revelation, the idea that emotions can be understood and managed through understanding their causes. These are no longer radical ideas. They are almost common sense, and Spinoza was one of the first to articulate them clearly. But some of his ideas are still radical. The denial of free will, the identification of God with nature, the view that everything is determined, these still cause discomfort, still resistance. Why? Because they touch something deep in how we see ourselves. We want to believe that we are free. We want to believe that our choices truly belong to us. We want to believe that we are special, that the universe cares about us. And Spinoza says, no, you are not free in the sense you imagine. Your choices are determined, and the universe does not care. Because the universe is not a person, it is just a natural process. This is hard to accept, but Spinoza would say, accepting is liberating. Because when you stop fighting against reality, when you accept what is, you find peace. Think about how to apply this in modern life. We live in an age of massive anxiety. Everyone seems stressed, depressed, overwhelmed. Why? Spinoza would say, because we live in illusions. The illusion that we should be able to control everything. The illusion that we should be perfect. The illusion that we should be happy all the time. The illusion that we are separate and need to compete. The illusion that material success will bring satisfaction. All these illusions cause suffering because they are false. And when we live based on the false, we inevitably collide with the real, and the collision hurts. Spinoza's philosophy offers an antidote. Not a magical antidote that eliminates all problems, but a real antidote that changes your relationship with problems. When you accept that you do not control everything, you stop blaming yourself when things go wrong. When you accept that you do not need to be perfect, you stop torturing yourself with impossible expectations. When you accept that happiness is not a constant state, but a result of understanding and acceptance, you stop chasing fantasies and start working with reality. When you accept that you are not separate, that you are part of a larger web, you stop competing destructively and start cooperating constructively. When you accept that material success does not bring ultimate satisfaction, you stop sacrificing everything for it and start seeking what really matters: understanding, connection, growth. This is not pessimistic resignation. It is optimistic realism. Realism about limitations, optimism about possibilities within those limitations. And here is something interesting. Modern science is validating many of Spinoza's intuitions. Neuroscience shows that decisions are made unconsciously before we are aware of them. Quantum physics shows that the universe is an interconnected system where everything affects everything. Psychology shows that emotions can be modified through changes in thought. Ecology shows that everything is connected, that there is no real separation between organism and environment. Spinoza said all this 300 years ago. Without scientific instruments, without empirical studies, just through rigorous thought and careful observation. It is remarkable, But here is an important question. Even if Spinoza was right about everything, should we believe? Not because authority said so, but because it makes sense. Not because it is comfortable, but because it is true. Spinoza himself would say, "Do not accept anything just because I said so. Investigate for yourself. Use your reason. Observe your experience. See if what I say corresponds to reality. If it does, accept it. If it does not, reject it." He did not want blind followers, he wanted independent thinkers. He wanted people to use their own minds, because that is the only way to truly understand. You cannot understand through authority, only through your own investigation. So I invite you to do that. Do not accept what has been said here as truth just because it was said. Test it. Experiment. Observe your own emotions. See if it is true that when you understand the causes, they lose power over you. Observe if it is true that when you accept the necessity of things, you find more peace than when you fight against them. Observe if it is true that you feel more connected when you realize that you are part of something greater. If you find that it is true, then you will have understood something real. Not because Spinoza said so, but because you saw for yourself, and this understanding will change your life. Not overnight, not magically, but gradually, naturally, inevitably. Because real understanding always changes behavior, not through willpower, but through transformation of who you are. Spinoza lived over 3 centuries ago, but his message is timeless, because it speaks about fundamental aspects of the human condition that have not changed. We still seek meaning, we still suffer from destructive emotions, we still want peace, we still want freedom, and Spinoza offers a path, not an easy path, not a path that promises fanciful rewards, but a real path that leads to real peace. The path is understand. Understand nature, understand yourself, understand your emotions, understand your limitations, understand your connection to everything, and through this understanding, be free. Not free to do whatever you want, but free to be who you really are. Free from illusions, free from fear, free from hatred, free from anxiety about things you cannot control. And in that freedom, find joy. Not joy that depends on external circumstances, but joy that comes from understanding your own nature as part of God. Joy of existing, joy of being, joy of thinking, joy of loving, joy of experiencing the wonder of self-aware consciousness. This is what Spinoza offered, and it is what is still available to anyone willing to do the work of understanding. Excommunication tried to silence him. The church tried to destroy his books. History tried to forget him, but they failed. Because truth has its own power. Power that does not need armies or threats. It only needs willing minds to see. And you saw today, you walked with Spinoza through his journey. You saw his courage, you saw his clarity, you saw his peace. And perhaps, just perhaps, you saw something in yourself. Something that has always been there, but you never fully realized. You are part of God. You always have been. You always will be. This is not belief, it is fact. You are made of the same substance as the stars. You are the universe knowing itself. You are God experiencing reality through this particular form. And when you fully understand this, when it ceases to be an idea and becomes direct perception, then you will experience what Spinoza experienced. Beatitude, peace, freedom, love, not just for others, but for everything, because everything is you, and you are everything. This was the message they didn't tell you in church. Because the church wanted intermediaries, wanted you dependent, wanted you afraid, because fear is a tool of control. But Spinoza said, you don't need intermediaries, you don't need salvation, you don't need anything but understanding, and understanding is available to all, not in sacred books, not in rituals, not in obedience, but in your own capacity to think, observe, understand. Use that capacity. It is the greatest gift you have. It is what makes you human. It is what makes you divine. Because when you think clearly, when you understand deeply, you are participating in the eternal activity of God, which is to be, to know, to love. And in that participation, you will find everything you have always sought, not because someone promised, but because it is the nature of things, it is how the universe works, it is truth, and truth is enough. Truth has always been enough. You just need the courage to see it, as Spinoza did, as you can, from this moment on, if you choose. Or rather, if your nature inclines you, because in the end you will do what you have to do, and that is perfect. because that is God being God, through you. Welcome to freedom.